Hello, thanks to all of the speakers. My name's Chantal, I'm a medical doctor from the Gold Coast and I'm studying a Master of Public Health at the moment. One thing that I noticed, particularly when we were talking about challenges throughout the session, was that I don't think there was mentioned, I apologise if there was, but climate change being a threat to elimination of malaria. And we know that there's potential, at least, for climate change to impact on the geographical distribution of malaria, as well as things, of course, like changing rainfall patterns, meaning there's increased availability of vector breeding sites and increased temperatures changing the behaviour of the vector and impacting on elements of the parasite's life cycle. So I just wondered, as experts in malaria, what is your level of concern regarding climate change as a potential threat to malaria elimination? And are you aware, I'm guessing it's probably not any, but are you aware of any specific initiatives or strategies going on, particularly in the Asia Pacific region, to try to either investigate this further or to address it? Thank you.
Well, I think you've identified a very important issue globally, which is climate change. And I suppose one thing I would say about climate change in respect to distribution of vector species is that whilst they might increase in some areas, they'll also be decreasing in others. So how that actually impacts on the overall burden of malaria, I suppose, is yet to be determined. But perhaps I could potentially ask our colleagues from Myanmar and PNG whether they could comment on the potential impact of climate change in their area.
Well, that's okay. Well, you are absolutely right. The first thing is that, malaria is a tropical disease, and so previously it has been confined in the equatorial region and affecting most of the country, a warm and a wet country. But because of the climate change, the malaria map is widening, and so it also affects some of the country in the cold region. So this is one point. I can give you an example of Myanmar. For example, like we have been identified very rarely about the malaria over 3,000 feet area before, but now because of the climate change and the global warming, now we can see the malaria cases in some of the villages which is over the 3,000 feet in these days. So this is one of the obvious effects that we can find because of the climate changes. So what are we going to do? So it's a very big topic, and so I don't know, because, well, climate change is a global concern, and so everybody is talking about, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Stephen?
Just to add to that, I think one of the other potential concerns about climate change is the economic disruption it's likely to cause, and that, programs like malaria elimination may become kind of swept aside if a country is dealing with, severe weather events and so on, and having to divert funds to that. So I think it's a very real concern. I think none of us really know quite what the impact is going to be, and it may be positive and negative in different places, but it's a major concern.
Steve.
Yeah, Steve Graham from University of Melbourne and Burnett Institute. Thanks very much to you all for excellent talks, and I was struck, not surprisingly, by some of the similar challenges that were being discussed in the session on TB elimination. In terms of the inadequate vaccines, the difficulty reaching some of the high-risk populations, sustaining community investment or funding when the numbers start coming down. And I guess the advantage you have in malaria is a rapid diagnostic test and a shorter cycle from being infected to cure. But nonetheless, I guess I just highlight this in the spirit of the Sustainable Development Goals in terms of our need to move from being more vertical to being a little bit more horizontal. And nice to hear mention of community health workers being utilised for more, for numbers of different tasks. So that's a naive hope, I guess. My perhaps more naive question is, in the response to trying to address drug resistance as it develops, what is the thinking around recycling of drugs? Given, for example, I know some of my colleagues, we worked together in Malawi. When they changed to Fansidar, there was a return of chloroquine resistance. Perhaps one of you might be able to just talk about that. It's probably a naive question.
No, and in malaria, some of our drugs, when they weren't working and then they were given with the artemisinin, actually started to improve again. So one of those was mefloquine. In experimental data, after it being given for a number of years with artesunate, its EC50 decreased a bit in the experimental data. So there are some gains, and they are starting to trial now triple therapies to look at that and see of different ways to do it. So I think for the next few years they'll just have to keep trying different ways of bringing back other drugs and also looking at extending the dosing. Once we extend the dosing beyond 3 days, it starts to become unsupervised, because patients come for 3 days to keep getting their parasites measured to see if they've cleared their infection. So that's going to be a challenge as well. And then there's all the cost issues as well. So, but yeah, it's probably the only way forward at the moment until a new drugs become available.
Oh, I could add. I'll just add to your first comment, Steve. I think it's really critical what you pointed out, that the similarities between, say, challenges in TB and malaria and a number of other diseases, that issue around integration of services and having a strong public health and primary healthcare systems that deal with the major challenges together and not just simply having vertical programs. And I think that also highlighted from some of the stuff, say, that both Wynne and Leanne presented, when funding might just, and motivation for malaria control starts to back off, then malaria control starts to decline. But if we have investment in the public health systems and the community health systems, primary healthcare, then hopefully that provides the sort of cornerstone, doesn't it, for tackling multiple problems and shifting, resources perhaps, or priorities within those networks. I think that's what we're lacking, aren't we? It's fundamentals that were discussed decades ago in the 60s. We're still struggling with that issue, I think, on a global scale.
And I kind of think another point to kind of touch on is that, all malaria, HIV and TB have all been kind of wrapped up into one SDG. So they've all been given the same target of 2030. So I think my kind of question to the panel here is, do we think that target of malaria elimination in 35 countries by 2030 is too ambitious? Stephen.
So it's not too ambitious because now I think, because now we are given as a matter of the malaria, TB, and the HIV. So I think if we see these three diseases, I think malaria is the best situation, I think, to eliminate, because the global trend, if we see the global trend, malaria is a little going downward, and so I think at least we should eliminate malaria as we agree, so that the other disease can also see what is happening in malaria, because now if we see the global trend, then malaria is pretty much going down compared to the other diseases.
Mm-hmm. Julie, yeah.
So yes, we can eliminate malaria, and we should, and we can obviously do great things with TB and all that. I think as things start to go down, sometimes you can see things become complacent, and also funds start to get shifted. So when I started working in malaria in '95, you'd often start a talk with malaria, as you know, in the top number of diseases, and everyone would be, wow. And then as years go on, I'm sort of dropping down in how many deaths, so, I don't get such the wow factor. But I think the fact that you've made such progress, it's actually the time we've got to keep pushing for funds to be going there, because otherwise you'll see these little epidemics will come back up. And for malaria with funding, and when they've made progress, it's often after wars, World War II, the Vietnam War, and there's been, all this fund's gone in to make a big effort, but then it starts to drop off, teeter off, and then up comes these epidemics again. So we just keep having to advocate to push things, keep things going. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so thanks. Unfortunately, we kind of run out of time, but I think, you finished off on an important point, and also kind of a common theme throughout this whole session, which has been the kind of maintenance of will to actually eliminate malaria, whether that be that from the political global level, but also right down to the grassroots level in country in places like Myanmar and PNG. So shame to stop the discussion now, but I'm aware that everyone probably wants to go off and have their dinner, so I'd like to thank you all for attending and thank the presenters for their presentations and discussion. Thank you.